When we talk about this issue, it is one that wages on the hearts and minds of so many American people. Workplace fairness. And Workplace Fairness is a non for profit organization that's working to actually preserve and promote employees' rights. Now, the organization believes the fair treatment for workers is sound public policy, as well as good public practice and free access to comprehensive, unbiased information about workers' rights without legal jargon. That's an essential ingredient in any fair workplace. And joining us now, we're pleased to have the Executive Director for Workplace Fairness, Edgar Ndjatou. And Edgar, glad to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Daren.
Thank you. And I want to talk really about laws. I mean, right now we are talking about a new law that just on another platform, about a new law that allows for employers to have to put up your salary here, and how that's going to help out in the negotiation process and workplace fairness, and how that really creates some sort of better traction for an employee, particularly in the area of negotiation. Things like this, I know your organization is front and center on.
Yes, absolutely. We definitely believe that it's important for employees to know the salary requirements of their jobs, and particularly in Women's History Month, and looking at the gender pay gap, it would really help certain types of employees, such as women, be able to negotiate fair salaries for work that they want to do at various employers.
Yeah. When we talk about discrimination, we know that it occurs in the workplace more prevalently, and it's more and more prevalent. How do you gauge in terms of discrimination in the workplace? Are we seeing things get better, or are we seeing things get worse?
That's a good question, Daren. I would say that while a lot of employers are getting a lot better about creating more fair workplaces, COVID in the past couple of years have shown that discrimination is still a very prevalent problem in the workplace. We've uncovered, and in many regards, that if anything, the pandemic has shown how bad it could be. When people have to make some difficult decisions around employment. And so, again, just looking at the way that women are treated in the workplace, there's still a lot of room for improvement, particularly around the way women have been impacted in terms of having to balance home and work and caregiving responsibilities, and a lot of employers not being sensitive to those needs. When we look at the way people who are disabled have been treated over the past couple of years, particularly those who have contracted COVID or are immunocompromised and have fears about going back into workplaces, particularly employers that are not being mindful of COVID precautions and making sure that their workplaces are safe, particularly those who are immunocompromised. And even around race discrimination, right? And that's still an issue. And again, some employers, or a lot of employers, are looking to make changes in the way they recruit and retain a diverse workforce, but there's still a lot of room to go.
Yeah. When we talk about trying to really address the issue of workplace discrimination, it's a hard uphill climb for a lot of people, because you have that threshold of actually having to prove it. And give us a little bit more, because when we talk about proving workplace discrimination, how do you go about documenting to get to that place? Because so many people have legitimate cases, but can't really reach the threshold to get some affirmative action on their behalf.
Yeah, I would say the most important thing is to be vigilant of your surroundings and what is said to you and what's being done to you. And here's the thing, many employers or bad actors are not going to blatantly do something discriminatory, right? Sinisterly, a lot of people have gotten smarter about the fact that they can't just use certain words in the workplace or overtly do certain things to make it known to you that they're discriminating against you, right? It often comes in the forms of subtle acts or things you just don't see, right? But the good news is that many cases these days are what we call circumstantial, that you don't have direct evidence, but if you look at all the clues around you, you can make a circumstantial case for discrimination. So My advice to people is that the minute you believe that something is not going well with your employer, I think it's always a good idea to start documenting your experiences and start creating some sort of journal narrative that you maintain. And you can do that. You can do that in a notebook. You can do a memo to a file to yourself and email yourself notes about things people say to you, things that have been done to you, how other people in your similar situation are being treated. So, if, for example, you are a secretary and you're a Black female secretary, you know the other secretaries around you that do the same work and work for the same person look different than you, then you want to document that, okay, today I got yelled at for taking a lunch break, but these other folks who also left at the same time I did not, and they look different than me, right? These are things you want to start documenting and take a note of, because if it comes to a point where you suffer a true uh, um, what we call an adverse employment action. So maybe you're docked pay for something unfairly, or you get a bad performance review where you felt was unfair, or you get suspended. Something where you lose money or you lose some sort of material status in your employment. Then you might have a case, right? But I find that a lot of times people don't do the work to take account as to things that are happening to them over time, because you'll be surprised what things you might help an attorney put together if you're keeping track of all the bad things that happen to you at work, and also making sure you're keeping track of all the documents. So any notices you receive, any paperwork. Now, I'm not saying that you should um, keep to yourself proprietary information. That's something you don't want to do. But if it's things that you would normally um, receive in the course of your business, those are things you want to keep for yourself, to ensure that you have some sort of evidence to show that that I'm being discriminated against.
A lot of people will say, listen, when it comes to discrimination or feeling unfairly treated at work, they recognize it. You've got coworkers who recognize it. You've got, you know, somebody that you can say, have you witnessed this? Yeah, I saw this. I saw this. But when it comes to coming forward, a lot of people sometimes will refrain from coming forward simply because of one thing: retaliation.
Right.
They want to keep their job. And I don't want to say too much because I really need this job. And if I lose this job, or I might be treated even more harshly, or somebody that I love or somebody that I'm connected to might have to go through something. So we know that there's some other actions that have been taking place legally to really deal against retaliation and whistleblower policy. So can you bring us up to speed with the latest laws that deal with whistleblower policy, but also speak to, number one, that whole thing about retaliation?
Sure. So I'll start with retaliation. So, you know, I always tell people that one of the hardest things to do is to file a lawsuit against your employer, because for that reason of retaliation. And it's a very scary prospect that an employer might decide to take certain action against you, which could be as worse, it could be as bad as you being terminated because you filed a lawsuit against them that you believe strongly about. So I do recognize that, and I always tell people it's a important decision you have to make, right? And it involves your family, it involves your bank account, of course, because losing a job or being demoted or having to pay for an attorney is very costly. So I say this to echo the fact that it's a very important decision to make. Now, on the topic of being a whistleblower, so being a whistleblower is a little different than our conversation about discrimination, because being a whistleblower essentially means that you are reporting an act that your company is doing or organization is doing that goes against public policy. So that could mean, for example, that your organization is using government money for something different than when it's intended, or you're reporting that your organization that happens to be in healthcare is taking acts that go against patient health or patient safety. right? Those are types of things that might mean you're a whistleblower. Now, being a whistleblower sometimes is not, you're not always seen as a hero, particularly by your employer, but it is an important um, citizen duty that we should protect more. And recently in New York City, they have made it a lot easier for people to be a whistleblower at work. So for starters, you don't have to be a current employee of your employer to be a whistleblower. You can be a former employee. So they expanded the definition of what it means to be an employee protected under the law. Also, it used to be that you had to have concrete evidence that um, that the act that you are reporting against is actually happening, which is hard to do, right? How would you know for certain that your employer is engaging in some nefarious act if you don't have access to certain documents, or you don't have access to certain people? Now the law says that you just have to have reasonable suspicion, right? So you just have to have an inkling that something is happening, not that it's for sure happening, which helps tremendously, particularly if you know something's up, you can't quite put your finger on it, but you just know that you're seeing something happening that's bad, and now you want to at least report it, right, and let the authorities try to get to the meat of the issue, right? And that's really important when it comes to protecting whistleblowers and instilling confidence that the system could work for them. Other things that are important to note with the new law is the fact that retaliatory action has been defined even more to make it to be more expansive. So it used to be that it can only be a discharge or suspension or demotion would be considered retaliatory. But just the fact that your future employment might be impacted negatively for coming forward could be retaliatory. So think about, like, if you're in an industry and it comes out that you reported your former employer for doing something wrong, that employer could get you blacklisted in the industry, right? Now if you can prove that that's what they're doing, that is also now retaliatory and protect and enforced under the new New York City law. And one more thing I want to highlight with the law is that it used to be that you had to be within the scope of your job duties to do a report. So if, for example, you are a nurse and you're reporting that your hospital is not adhering to certain patient care laws in the city, you might be okay. But if you are a janitor who just happened to work in that unit, you may not be protected under the old law. But now that changes. So the nurse and the janitor are both protected equally under the new New York City law for whistleblowers.
Yeah. Before we go, I want to give an opportunity for our viewers to know a little bit more about how to get connected into your organization, and if they want to get more information, the services that you provide.
Yeah, so our core mission is to provide the public on workers' rights laws around the country, including New York State, and New York City. And so we have over 400 pages of Know Your Rights content that is in non-legal jargon that will help you understand your workplace rights in different areas, including, as we covered today, whistleblower protection and discrimination. And we're on all major social media platforms, so you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We also have a weekly newsletter that I encourage everyone to sign up for, because we keep you updated on the latest news in workers' rights advocacy and what's happening in terms of employee rights. And also, we have a fantastic blog as well that we encourage you all to check out. So that's how you can find us on the internet.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us, Edgar, and being with us, and certainly providing some much needed information. I think that as we look into 2022, that we can honestly say that it really is starting to look more towards the year of the employee,
Yes.
more than it is towards the employer these days, which is pretty good, because for so many times I think employees have gotten the short end of the stick in many ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you for so much for being with us, Edgar Ndjatou, our guest here, and want you to stay with us. We got more here on the Social Justice Forums. We have another guest coming up in a minute.